Hello and welcome to a new wintry edition of Saved by the 90s. My name's Adam Patterson, and with me today is a guy who's always ready to hit the slopes, Mr. Ken Bakley. Hey, Ken.
Hello.
Winter is here, the snow is falling, and this month we have a blustery mix of January movies to discuss, so cuddle up around the fire, sip some hot cocoa, and relax. This is Saved by the 90s.
When Mom gets a cough and cold, everyone suffers.
Mom, Dad's ironing.
Time to doctor that cough with Robitussin.
Look, Mom's feeling better.
Robitussin, recommended by more doctors, pharmacists, and Dr. Mom.
Our first film this month concerns the livelihood of a small ski lodge, one that must be upheld by a ragtag group of ski patrollers. Directed by Richard Correll and released on January 12th, 1990, this is Ski Patrol.
The Snowy Peak Ski Patrol is looking for a few good men. You must be a daring outdoorsman, ready to maneuver dangerous curves, and always quick on your feet. All applicants must be willing to relocate, athletically inclined, and level-headed.
What do we think?
I think I want to go home.
You can't...
Oh, God. Pops is the longtime owner of an easygoing ski lodge, but its future is put in jeopardy by cutthroat businessman Sam Maris. Intent on replacing the ski lodge with an enormous resort, Maris schemes to get Pops's lease revoked. What he doesn't count on is the mountain's madcap ski patrol. As the crazed crew leaps into action to save Pops's business, Maris begins to wish he'd never thought of building his eyesore on their winter playground. Got a lot of slopes to talk about this month. So strap in.
What was going on with the early 90s and like skiing?
It was huge. It was huge. Just skis everywhere. So what did you think of Ski Patrol?
I didn't think much about it. Like, it's, one of those completely unremarkable comedies that kind of just comes and goes. It's one of those movies that it's short. It's like 90 minutes, but it feels even shorter because it just keeps like throwing things at you. It's just like a complete onslaught of jokes, but not to like an airplane level, but just right under it, which is far worse because you can feel that little tiny space in between all of them, and in the middle you're realizing that a lot of them aren't really landing.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the airplane thing, because at the opening, the kind of goofball opening, I was thinking to myself, oh, this is some kind of spoof. This is like one of these, like an airplane movie, but it's not. You're right. They do sort of play with some goofball antics, but it's nowhere near the level of absurdity that something like the airplane movies would have in them, which is unfortunate, because at first I was like, they're going to go there with it, because there's like that scene when the guy hits the mailbox at the beginning, and like the zipper, this little zipper battle that they have with their jackets at the beginning. And I'm like, I was kind of excited. I was like, oh, I really hope that this is a spoof movie, but it's, no, it's not. It is not a spoof movie.
Yeah. The thing about Airplane is that, it understands that the plot, of course, is just like a little clothesline on which you put all of these jokes. But a movie like this that is constantly pitching at a less manic level, it tries to flesh out its story and put the jokes on top of it, but it does not realize that you really could not tell any of these characters or really their choices affecting the story in any meaningful way could you distinguish them.
Right. You have Paul Feig in there as a hopeful ski patrol guy. He's sort of his name's Stanley, and he's sort of the blundering best friend of Is Jerry Kramer? Is that the main guy?
Is it?
Roger Rose? I don't even know.
Might be. This movie does not do anything for me, so I can't remember.
I'm pretty sure
anyone already.
I'm pretty sure Jerry is the main guy who comes back.
Oh yeah.
He comes back into town to rejoin his ski patrol brethren, and George Lopez is in there. He's another ski patrol. It's funny, like George Lopez, even back then, looked like he was 45 years old, 50 years old.
He like aged really rapidly and then just stopped.
It's very strange because he looks the exact same as he does now, but he doesn't look like a dude in his like early 20s like everyone else.
Yeah. Like maybe there was like, he just did all of his aging through middle age at once, which is, very cost and time effective. So
yeah, his character was not great. He did this horrible Rodney Dangerfield impersonation multiple times, more than once. He did it, and it was terrible both times, and it was tough to watch. Then you have TK Carter, who plays Iceman. Iceman is he's the token black guy of this movie, who I think it was, I can't remember what movie that was. It might have been Not Another Teen Movie, where they made fun of the token black guy, and they said that his only purpose was to react to things and say, damn. And that's literally what this guy does multiple times.
Yeah, this character, like, the way that this character is written is just completely belittling. It's like, even for a broad comedy like this, it does not play at all.
Then you have this guy named Suicide. He's kind of the wild card. He's not one of the ski patrol members. He's just some ski bum that has some really serious problems. Like he's got these like masks, and he has these like different personas that he does.
Yes, he argues with his mask personas by just repeatedly like tilting his head back and forth to indicate which mask is talking.
But then he also has like this puppet one, like that, and he's a little bit of an adrenaline junkie, and he's always getting himself into trouble, and the ski patrol has to come save him. You have Leslie Jordan in there, maybe the funniest of the bunch.
I'd say so.
He was really funny as Murray. There's like most of these movies, there's a fair amount of pranks that are happening. Lots of pranks, and the prank that they pull on Murray when they give him the growing pills, and when they place him inside the like Santa's village house, and he wakes up and he thinks he's grown too much. That was actually a pretty funny scene, I thought.
Yeah, that worked.
I thought that this was far better than another movie that we'll be talking about on this episode that is very similar. Not to jump ahead too far, but a little foreshadowing. I think that this is way better than another one.
We'll talk about that.
It's better, but I felt like this was slightly more racist than that one. That one had its own problems. That one was more like, homophobic.
That one has like out front problems, like problems that are just right there and you can just count them off. This one is almost nefarious, in which case you think it's kind of harmless, but then you think about how it's treating basically every character of color, and it's appalling.
Yeah, a good example is the scene when, so you have this is your classic kind of slacker, the cool dudes versus the yuppies. And the yuppies are working with this contractor guy to buy the ski lodge, and they're trying to sabotage the ski lodge, and they're trying to sabotage the ski patrol guys for some reason so that they get strikes against them or whatever. And one of the things that they do to George Lopez's character is he's at the hardware store, and they go to the hardware store, and for some reason this hardware store sells watches. and they take all these watches and put them in George Lopez's bag, and they go up to the guy and they go, "That ethnic man is trying to pull a Frito Bandito."
Yes. Yeah.
and he ends up getting arrested and thrown in jail.
Yes. I watched that and I just kind of stopped. Like, I almost stopped the movie for a little bit because I had to process that out of this movie, though, once again, you could see was trying to reach like a fairly, general audience. And then they just have these bizarre tangents that have aged terribly because there was a point, I suppose, where you could pass it off as funny because it was off color, but there's no joke there. The joke there is to do something about based solely around like that the character would be profiled. It's like the joke doesn't work because there's not a joke there.
Correct. There's also an ongoing joke, running gag with these Asian tourists that are taking pictures of everything that's going on, sort of poking fun at these gawking tourists.
A joke that would have been around by then and just kept going for like another decade. Like, I think there's even there's variations of that joke, and at least I was gonna say multiple Michael Bay movies, but like that's like a thing that happens in Armageddon. Is that there's literal like impacts happening in New York, and he stops for this hilarious joke about an Asian tourist that is angry because it upset their schedule.
Yeah, those jokes don't necessarily hold up.
No, they don't.
They don't really hold up. I will say that the skiing scenes in this were pretty good.
Yeah, a lot of the skiing scenes in a lot of the movies we're going to talk about are pretty good. Like, uniformly good against incredibly not as good movies, to the point where that also aided the fact that I keep getting like aspects of these movies confused in my head.
Oh, yeah. No, these movies are really, really easy to mix up. Like, I was thinking just now, in fact, was this the movie where they did the figure eight thing? And I'm like, no, that's not it. That's not it.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, they do easily get mixed up. The skiing scenes in this movie were more like action set pieces, where there was like a runaway so-and-so, and they end up skiing through the lodge. Like, we've never seen that before. You're the classic out of control person going down the slopes, going through the lodge. Mm-hmm. That happens in this. And then of course there's a scene where the yuppies mess with George Lopez. They always seem to go after George Lopez. Yeah. Did you notice that?
I did.
3 of the things that they do to sabotage the lodge were all done to George Lopez. There was the stealing, there was the snowmobile where they like messed with the brakes, and he ended up crashing into like the ladies' bathroom. And then there was the cannon thing that they messed with the sights on the cannon that I guess is for avalanches. Either way, this was not a very good movie.
It really doesn't work just on any of the levels it's really going for, just because it doesn't quite understand like the balance between it being just a succession of jokes or it trying to tell a cohesive story. And so the jokes are weirdly like tempered back from, like you mentioned, this very kind of fun high level opening that just sort of trickles on from there. And so it can't really build up its characters enough for it to matter to make up the difference.
Yeah. And I know that we mentioned some of the questionable jokes that they made, but for the most part, it's a pretty inoffensive movie. It's rated PG. So there's not a lot of adult content here. No, it's almost like like Meatballs or one of those movies where the jokes are goofy and stupid, but it's not anything that's that would be geared towards adults. We're not talking Porky's or anything like that.
No.
But it feels, I mean, it came out in January 1990, so it feels very much like an 80s movie. It doesn't have any kind of 90s vibes to it whatsoever. I mean, other than the amazing outfits, which the next movie we're going to talk about, they actually share some of the same outfits. I don't know if you noticed that, but there's this, they wear the main dude I think it's the main dude. The one guy wears the same pink Oakley ski goggles that the other guy wears in the other movie. I also noticed that they seemed to, I don't know if this was on purpose, but it almost seemed like they were blatantly ripping off the Seinfeld music during the scenes when the dog with the dog. First of all, the dog's name is Dumpster, which I loved. And there's this running gag with Leslie Jordan's character Murray, and he, I guess, doesn't like the dog. And he's allergic. And throughout the whole freaking movie, he's like tripping over the dog. And then the dog's like always in his face and it like burps in his face and stuff. And every time they do a scene like that, it plays this music that's very reminiscent of Seinfeld.
Which doesn't make a lot of sense. I guess which would have to be coincidental because Seinfeld wasn't really a thing yet. Like it was on the air, but it wasn't really prominent enough when this movie would have been made to really be something that would even be worth stylistically imitating yet.
I don't think so. I mean, I think it probably was just a coincidence, but
yeah,
because Seinfeld came out in '89 and it wasn't very popular in its first season.
Yeah, I did notice that. And I also thought just a lot about that thread that you mentioned, that it does do that. It does have a lot of hang-ups on running gags that really don't pay off, like, because it doesn't understand that balance between its own components. Like, it really overestimates just the most trivial things, like that running joke between Leslie Jordan and the dog. Like, it's really thinks you're going to care about that a lot more than you would ever have any need to.
Exactly. Yeah. And in the end, I think that Ski Patrol is just not great. I'm definitely lukewarm on Ski Patrol.
Yeah, I feel like we've been mostly negative on this, but there's really not much here to be overly turned off by, in as much as the reverse is true. It's just something that has components that are more interesting than others, or components that age particularly badly, but the rest of it, and the vast majority of it, is just completely mediocre.
Yeah, I mean, I probably would have forgot most of this movie had I not written down notes. So that's kind of where we're at with Ski Patrol.
Keep it locked in, because Saved by the 90s will be right back.
To help relieve the stuffy, drippy misery of a head cold, remember, Actifed. And to help reduce the fever and sinus pain of a bad head cold, now there's new Actifed Plus.
Our next title also takes place on the slopes, but instead of a madcap group of skiers versus a yuppie businessman, it's a madcap group of skiers versus a yuppie group of skiers. Released on January 11th, 1991, this is Ski School.
Ski School. It's not about learning how to ski. For Dave Marshall and his gang, life is one big party.
Welcome to my kingdom. I will bed you all before the night is through.
They're the best at what they do.
I've been watching you ski. You're really good.
May I present to you Section 8.
But the competition is fierce.
The dead. I control this mountain, and I say this is your last year.
With their backs against the wall, they'll do anything to win.
Do you want to have...
Dave and his friends are a pack of highly skilled skiers and devoted party animals. On the slopes, they're known as Section 8. But their reputation is at risk when a ski school of snobs, headed by pompous and preppy Reed, shows up looking to win the end-of-season downhill competition. Now the stakes have never been higher because if Section 8 is beaten, they'll lose more than bragging rights. They'll also lose their jobs. Adam, why don't you start us off on ski school?
I will gladly start off this. What a nightmare this movie is.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. This movie is so horrible. First of all, there's so much to deconstruct with this.
Mm-hmm.
It opens, there's like this cold open, and you get no character introductions. You get no character development. You're just dumped in here, and we're expected to know like who these people are and what their relationship is. And then you have like the new guy coming in, and the new guy's coming in, and he's being assigned to Section 8. And it's sort of like, this movie is definitely reminiscent of Animal House or Revenge of the Nerds. But the thing is, like, he gets introduced to Section 8, but he doesn't really. Like, he just walks in the house, and then all of a sudden it's like they somehow know him. And I find it really confusing about what choices were made in how these characters were introduced. And then there's like a scene really early on where the main guy, the new guy, is like hooking up with this woman, and we're like, were they even introduced to each other? Did we see them meet each other, or are we skipping ahead? Like, what's going on here? It's just structurally, it's so messy.
It feels like a movie that was definitely a lot longer than it ended up being, and was very heavily like cut and rearranged on one hand, but on the other hand, I can't imagine a version of this movie where it actually does make sense, because it almost feels like it cashes in on its own like just complete distaste for anything. It's a cheap like Revenge of the Nerds style sort of like movie that would be set on like a college campus, except it's not. Like it like that's the setting is the only really thing that would be changed here. And these kinds of movies obviously wouldn't want to be structurally innovative, but even so, like the level to which this movie does not care in even trying to sell itself as funny and just hoping that it'll just throw everything in front of you and you'll piece it together yourself is just astounding.
Yeah, I actually wrote this in my notes here too. I feel like they removed giant chunks of the movie because that's the only thing I could come up with that made any sense as to why things were playing out the way they were. Like, I was just baffled by these characters and how they seemed to just know each other, and we just went from like scene to scene, and there was just no, like, there were times when I was like, is that a good guy or a bad guy? Because there was a bad guy that looks exactly like the new guy that's coming in, and then there were times where I'm like, who's the lead here? Who's the main character? Because they made it seem like it was this new guy coming in, but then we abandon him, and then we focus on like the leader of Section 8, Dean Cameron, who plays Dave Marshak, or Marshall, depending on how you look at it, because that's the other glaring thing. I noticed it one time where they said his last name, and I was like, that didn't look right. And then they say it again, and I actually paused it, rewound, played it again, and I was like, they definitely said a different last name. They didn't say Marshak, but they dubbed it in. So I after the movie, I looked it up, and sure enough, his name was Marshall. And I guess at some point they decided that was too bland, so they changed it to Marshak. But the voices, there's frequent times when the lips aren't matching at all. And then there's even one scene when they are showing during the race, and they're showing the leaderboard, and it says Dave Marshall on the leaderboard. And in that trailer we just listened to, they said Dave Marshall.
Yeah.
I mean,
I feel like that kind of says everything
exactly.
you need to know right there.
That just lets you know what's happening with this movie. It is so messy and rough. It is just a rough movie. It is a blatant ripoff of Animal House or Revenge of the Nerds, and nothing works. Like so many questions around this school. Like what is this school? I don't understand how this school works, because you have all dudes in this school, this ski school. I think it seems like it's all guys, but then you have seemingly hundreds of women everywhere, but they serve no purpose other than to literally be arm candy for these guys. Like, I don't know if you noticed, but there's almost no female dialogue in this movie whatsoever. Like, they're just there to be objects.
Yes. Yeah. I like, it's impossible. Just thinking about this movie, it's impossible not to think about how just not even like aging poorly does not do justice to what it's like to watch this movie in 2019.
Yeah.
You know, it feels like almost a postmodern parody of what like an 80s comedy looked, an 80s sex comedy looked like. It's like a postmodern parody of how just genuinely terrible it is.
It's a lot like if you have ever seen any of the Trauma movies that are comedies and not horror movies, that's what it's like. It's like a Trauma movie. It's like a Trauma comedy where they used to make these like sex comedies in the 80s, and this is pretty much what that's like, where it's just like none of it makes any sense at all. It is so poorly thrown together. Everybody in it is pretty, well, you know what? The performances, some of them weren't horrible, but the dialogue was atrocious, and everything else was pretty rough. And this is actually a Canadian film. It came out in 1990 in Canada, and then it came out in January of 91 here in the States. And believe it or not, they actually made a sequel to this too.
Really?
I did. I started watching it.
Why?
You know, I'm a bit of a completionist.
I know. I admire that about you. I could never be that dedicated, but still.
The version that I was watching was on YouTube, and it was like the TV version, so it was all edited for television. And the sequel came out in 1994, and Dean Cameron was in it. He was reprising his role, and Will Sasso was in it too. I didn't finish it. It's very bad.
I would imagine.
It's probably on the same level as this one, I would say. But I just think it's funny that they actually made a sequel to this thing.
Because I do get the feeling that I do get the inkling that there is something of a cult following around this movie.
Absolutely.
But it's not the kind of thing that I imagine would have taken off until many years later. So just the thought that within a couple of years of the original one, they would immediately go for a sequel is very interesting to me, because that would indicate there was either an access of like funding and the ability to get a sequel greenlit by, I guess, either very easy to persuade backers, or this movie did a lot better than I thought it did.
Yeah, maybe it did. Maybe it did okay because it came out in January when there was like nothing else coming out. There were
was it a hit in Canada?
Well, maybe, I don't know.
Maybe.
So there were a lot of pranks in this one too, as you might expect. Lots of shenanigans going on, mostly with Section 8 pulling pranks on Section 1. And maybe the best one is when they tricked two of the guys from Section 1 into getting into bed together. And the funny thing is that after that all happened, the one guy, I guess, I can't remember what the context was, but he goes, way to make that homo stuff work for us. And then they do this weird fist bump thing that is perhaps the strangest fist bump I've ever seen in my life. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff happening. A lot of homophobic jokes going on.
Yeah, this movie is aggressively homophobic, which, I mean, it's the kind of thing that I was bracing for going in. But once again, just with every aspect, even like the way that it treats its female characters, going into a movie like this, you're not expecting anything particularly remarkable in that front. But I think it even comes back to like even the script. No matter how low your expectations are, it goes lower, because I think it fails at a very basic level for a movie, which is no matter what kind of movie you're making, at least put on the effort of playing to your audience, where this is a movie that feels like it has open contempt for its audience. And that you don't care that we don't know what the character's name is. You don't care that none of the scenes have anything to do with each other. So here, just take this garbage and enjoy it.
You're going to love this.
Yeah.
You liked Revenge of the Nerds, right? Well, here we go. It's Revenge of the Nerds on the slopes.
Yeah. It's part of the same logic that you can't intentionally make camp, because camp comes from like a failed attempt at creating great art, where this movie was not trying to be great art, and that's not the value here. It's creating this disposable entertainment product for a very specific demographic, but it doesn't care. Like, it's a movie that is not trying. It has either such glaring incompetence, which it doesn't seem to, because like you said, like, the performances are okay as far as these go, but it's a movie that just seems to have completely given up on the idea that it would have in any way put in effort at looking remotely coherent.
Sure, yeah. This is nobody put in any major effort in this movie, I don't think. This was like low effort. This was a low effort movie. I mean, looking at the script, this is very blatantly Revenge of the Nerds. I mean, you have the two teams going up against each other in the big race, and then you have, you know, Section 8, who is devising these. They're cheating, basically. They just cheat their way to a victory in the race at the end, and you have, you know, your villains, your yuppie team with the slick back hair, and they're all wearing black, whereas the Section 8, these guys are wearing so much neon it was hurting my eyes. I mean, there was so much neon going on back then. I think probably 90% of my wardrobe back then was neon. I was definitely loving the neon. And and then they cheat and they win. And
I also think it's interesting that for a movie that sort of, you know, has all the stereotypical yuppie villains, the heroes kind of get a little bit yuppie-ish at the end.
Yeah.
Like, they become the thing that they're trying to villainize. I mean, the degree to which it should be taken seriously, of course, is not very much, but just on a literal level, they start throwing around words like corporate restructuring, and they make they acquire a business at the end and reshape it based on their own expectations,
which is hilarious. I love how that's what wraps everything up at the end. They're like, oh, the hot babe bought the mountain and they renamed it Party Mountain. And then everything is great.
Yeah, I mean, that's almost the most yuppie-ish thing that you could ever do. That's how this, like to act like you're toppling an established structure, but really you're just taking what they're doing and just making it even more like turboed right into your soul. Yeah, they become the yuppies.
They do, in a sense. And then there was that amazing fourth wall break there at the end where he's giving us a little wink. He knows we had a good time. Old Dave Marshak, because he's getting the babes. He got the mountain, he got the babes. Everything is good. How does this school work? Ken.
I have so many questions.
How does it work? Like, what are they in school for? Are they in school to be instructors? And if so, like, how are they being tested? Are there classes? What is going on in this?
How long are these like courses? How much of the year are they there?
Because it doesn't seem like they're doing anything.
Yeah, it seems like it's all played to be not a huge thing, but this was definitely written as just like a blatant Animal House Revenge of the Nerds ripoff. It was probably set at a college, but then someone thought, there are too many of those. We're going to set it at a ski school and just change that part and nothing else.
Yeah, and you have like the different sections and the different, frat houses, essentially, where they all live together in the same. And it looks like, all these frat houses look the exact same in all of these movies. Revenge of the Nerds, PCU, Animal House, all of them. They all look the same. Even Glory Days. I think that was 90s. Glory Days. Late 90s, maybe. And it's just like, come on. And it wasn't even... There was nothing funny about it. Like, there wasn't a single joke that made me laugh in this. And I laugh at a lot of dumb stuff. I'm not like some stuck-up prude. I laughed at a number of things in Ski Patrol, and nothing about this was even remotely enjoyable. It's just... And the skiing in this one is not... I didn't think it was nearly as good as the skiing in the other movies.
Yeah, it's... to whatever extent... Ski Patrol. Ski Patrol was at least more focused on its skiing. To whatever extent this movie is actually featuring skiing, it really doesn't go much in on that either.
At least in Ski Patrol, we see them working. Like, we see them saving suicide and doing their job. This movie just they don't really. It doesn't seem like they do anything. They just party, just nonstop parties. And women who are just these mute women, dozens, an army of mute women that live at this lodge that are stuck to these guys like leeches, even though they're clearly disgusting animals. And none of that makes any sense whatsoever. Oh boy. This movie was maybe one of the worst movies we've reviewed on this show.
I'd say it competes for that title.
we frequently review some rough movies, but man, this one.
I was not prepared for quite how just lazy and completely offensive this would end up being.
I should note that you can rent all of these movies that we're going to be talking about on today's show on Vudu. So if you do want to see Ski School for some reason, it is available for rent on Vudu.
Go for it, folks.
Yeah, don't. It's a waste of $2.99 or $3.99 if you want the HDX version.
If you're gonna, you may as well see it in the highest resolution possible.
Which is 720p, by the way. They don't have a 1080p version. I don't think any of the movies that we're going to be talking about, they have 1080p versions.
Clearly, they're all just waiting for their 4K HD Blu-ray restorations.
Perhaps. I could definitely see like Shout Factory putting out this movie, like restoring it and putting it out. I could definitely see that happening.
I think out of these four, this is the one that has the closest thing to like a built-in base, because it does have like a cult following. But even then, I don't think it's quite big enough to justify like a big re-release. But I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe.
I know that they're fans of this. I know that this movie was this was referenced in an episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I know that. I read that on the wiki. But so there's definitely fans.
Yeah, there's definitely an audience somewhere.
All right, that's Ski School.
I cannot wait to stomp out some of my new moves. I'm gonna do a board slide into a 720 stale fish. I'm gonna bust a rodeo flip off that kicker, man. I'm gonna huck myself off that kicker into a 1260 indie grab. Yeah? Yeah! Let's do it!
With 34 courses, 35 maneuvers, and thousands of combinations, Cool Borders 3 will put you right on the mount. The rest is up to you.
Oh, that was sick! Did you see that? Some sick air, bro!
Hey dudes, did you pick up Cool Borders 3 for PlayStation and want a little help with all the unlocks? Well, listen up, because this month's Cheaters Corner is for you. To unlock all the boards and characters, just start a new tournament and use the name Open'em. That's OPEN_EM. That's it. Now have fun busting those 1080s.
Surprisingly, our third feature this month also takes place at a ski resort, this time with 2 out-of-towners heading to the slopes to become expert ski instructors. Directed by Patrick Hasberg and released on January 22nd, 1993, this is Aspen Extreme.
In 1 square mile of snow, the beautiful, the rich, and the powerful come to escape. And it's the closest 2 friends from Detroit will ever get to paradise.
What do you think? I think we'll be like the Beverly Hillbillies in that place. They pay you to be ski instructors, right? Hope you guys are good. We are the best skiers on this mountain.
So there's about 100 guys. Maybe 2 make it till spring.
We'll make it.
Aspen Extreme.
Dream big and don't dream at all, baby.
Rated PG-13. Starts Friday, January 22nd.
Oh boy, that was amazing, that trailer. TJ and his friend Dexter quit their jobs in Detroit to become ski instructors in Aspen, while TJ advances to the most popular instructor of the school during the season. He has to take care for Dexter, whose future is less bright as he begins thinking about becoming a drug courier, bringing their friendship to a test. Meanwhile, the rich businesswoman Bryce supports TJ and his writing ambitions and invites him to live at her home. But in her absence, he falls in love with the stunningly beautiful blonde radio moderator, Robin. So
I take it you did not find this movie a masterpiece?
I did not find it a masterpiece. I didn't hate it.
No, I didn't.
I thought it was fine. I mean, it was okay. There were a lot of just ridiculous things that happened in this, but I didn't actually hate it. I like fish out of water stories, and this is definitely a fish out of water story. You have these two Detroiters, or actually, I don't know if they're from Detroit. They're from Michigan.
They're like from like the Detroit area.
Yeah, so you have,
but like a suburb or something.
Yeah, these 2 blue collar guys who decided to drop everything, head to Aspen, become ski instructors, and Peter Berg. He's the one that I just couldn't get over watching in this movie. Peter Berg and Paul Gross, and it was fine. Like I didn't have many problems with it.
It's fine, like you said. And I think the problem is that there are a lot of things that happen in it that don't feel adequately tracked through, as you say. It doesn't really quite track, which is a bigger problem than it would be in like Ski School, because this movie is a drama. So it's more about these characters, and that doesn't help that it still feels strangely underdeveloped.
Yeah, especially with Peter Berg's arc in this. He initially doesn't get on the team, and I guess they never flat out say that or show their boss like saying sure he can come on board or whatever, but I guess they just assume that he's one of them now. And
yeah, this movie skips a lot of time. Like, this movie has a very odd relationship to just its own chronology.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I don't know how much time passes in this. It's very confusing, but
it feels like it could be anywhere between 2 months and like 5 years.
Yeah, they seem
I was never quite
they
sure.
seem like they're prepping for that figure eight competition for a really long time. But yeah, so Peter Berg, they reluctantly bring him on board. They have 5 spots available. They fill him up, but then Paul Gross is like whining about not hiring his friends. So they decide to hire him as sort of the guy who gets all of the jobs that nobody else wants. So he has to dress up like Santa Claus and teach do like the little kid class, and he gets like the other people that nobody wants. And I guess he has a problem with that. And then they give him this guy who everyone else, I guess, was kicked off of this guy, or the guy fired them or something. And he gets him, and the guy, I guess, is just completely incompetent. And he does the classic out of control ski man scene where he's just flailing, and he gets suspended for 2 weeks. And I guess that's enough to make him be like, well, I guess I'll sell drugs. and but you never know, like, how did he get into this? Like, all of a sudden he's just at a bar and he's like super sweaty and he's drinking and he's chain smoking, and we're like, what's going on here? And then all of a sudden he's in the bathroom dumping like a gigantic,
it's enormous,
a gigantic Ziploc bag of cocaine down the toilet.
Like, there's so much.
and then the next scene, he's running completely naked through like down the road, and Paul Gross's character of TJ finds him, and he's like, at first I thought he was like drugged or something, because he was just babbling incoherently. Like they did something to him, like they injected him with something, because he was just insane. And why was they beat him up and took all his clothes, I guess?
Yeah, like the second half of this movie, I think someone once said, some critic or somebody once said something, and I feel like it was an excellent comparison for a lot of movies, that it felt like it was comprised entirely of deleted scenes. Like, the entire second half of this movie feels like all deleted scenes. It feels like all things that come after something else. Like, we're not seeing the parts that drive the plot forward. We're just seeing the extra reactions that were taken out of the theatrical cut.
Yeah, and that's a really great point, because all of this stuff doesn't happen until the latter half of the movie. Like, everything else up until that point is just these two dudes, you know, trying to make it work in Aspen. They got this job. They're trying to save up enough money to get a place. They do get a place. You know, they start to meet some women that they like, maybe. And then, like, all of a sudden, second half comes and it's like everything is downhill. Peter Berg is getting beat up and he owes this drug dealer 10 grand and then he dies.
I mean, at least they explain how he died. Honestly, it almost feels like a blessing that they did that much. Like I thought, you know, peak Aspen Extreme would have just been, he's there in one scene, the next scene they're talking about how he's been dead for 6 months.
Yeah, they did.
So at least they explained that he died in an avalanche.
They do. I mean, they show first of all, the avalanche scene I thought was great.
Oh, that was very good.
I thought that the way that was shot looked really good.
All the skiing in this movie is
I did want to highlight that all the skiing in this movie is excellent. The avalanche scene when Peter Berg gets killed, like, we see him maybe get covered up, but then like the next scene, the reveal that he died it does take place a while later, because it like comes through on the news wire, and the radio operator, what's her name, Terry Polo, has to read the announcement that he was killed, and that's how she found out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, I mean, the avalanche scene is pretty good. Like, the way it's revealed is a very good scene. So there are aspects of this movie that really do work, but it's just structured and paced so inexplicably.
There's all these plot threads that happen in this, and then often it feels like they leave these plot threads dangling, or that they introduce them just to further along the narrative that they don't necessarily work. Like, for instance, there's a scene where TJ and Dexter get in this big argument for something, and then they start like physically fighting with each other, and then they sort of aren't friends anymore. But the fight seems so pointless and not really justified for any reason at all. And then the whole thing with him trying to become a writer, like, it's mentioned at the very beginning, and then it's mentioned a couple other times, but every time that they would bring it up again, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's right. He wanted to be a writer.
Yes.
And it's funny because my wife sat down to watch part of it, but she missed like pretty much the first half. So when she sat down and started watching it at the very end, he's like, I'm going to focus on being a writer. And she's like, what? Like, what? When was that mentioned? And she'd watched like an hour of it, and it was like, they just dropped that idea. And then they do it with his relationship with Bryce, where it seems like the two of them are together, even though they seem to also be establishing a relationship between him and Robin. And then she has to go away for business or something and doesn't tell him. So he's just like, all right, well, I'm done with her. And it's just, there's so many pieces of this that don't really coalesce. Like they don't really fit together.
Yeah, I think that comparison that the second half is all deleted scenes, like that's the most apt comparison I could think of. I wish I could remember where I heard that, because I think about that all the time, and especially during this movie, that's all I could think about. And so then I started thinking about, trying to figure out where I had heard that more than the movie, because the movie was just, completely failing me at that point. So I don't know. It starts strong, and it's strong intermittently, but there are just so many bizarre narrative choices throughout this that just really do not add up.
Yeah, and then like, of course, so when Peter Berg gets killed, they're training for this like figure 8 competition thing. And then when Peter Berg dies, he's like, I'm not going to do it. And then all of a sudden this like new guy pops up, and which is weird. Like, how much time has passed here, because they only had 5 spots available and they hired an extra person, Peter Berg. So even with Peter Berg gone, you would think that they don't need to fill another spot. They don't need to hire another person, but I guess they did. And he ends up partnering with this new guy. And of course they destroy that slope. Oh man, they beat. And then of course there's the bad guys. There's the yuppies. They're going up against this guy who's this like veteran who is just plain evil. The jokes that he makes about the death of his best friend, like, just brutal. Like, no human being would do that, I don't think.
I would hope not, but yeah, like, there's so many bad choices that are made that make none of these, that just essentially render all of these characters just in absolutely bizarre positions, like either characters that have unclear motivations, aspirations, or just like antagonists that are just like cartoonishly evil. Like, it just, none of it tracks.
Yeah, and especially because TJ is like, so the villain guy, he gets sick, I guess, and they have TJ teaching this private lesson in this guy's absence, and the guy gets super pissed about it. He doesn't seem sick at all, so I was a little confused about that. Like, the guy was in the locker room getting changed, so it's like, how can you be sick? He's like there in the locker room, looks like he's been skiing all day. And TJ's like, well, I'll give you half the tip if you want it. And the guy's just like, no. Like, he's being a nice guy to this dude, and he's just, and
I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to, but
No, but I mean, it's just he's being so nice to him, and you'd think that he would, especially after the death of his friend, you'd think that he would be at least a little sympathetic. But no, he doubles down. He doubles down on it after Dexter gets killed.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, overall, I just thought it was mediocre. I don't know that I'll remember much of this in a short time. It's got a pretty cool poster too.
Oh yeah, I was about to mention that the poster is very good. It's very early 90s.
Yeah, there's two posters. The one that we're referring to is the one that's on IMDb, not the one that's on Letterboxd. I think Letterboxd
what's the Letterboxd push? I'll pull up the.
Oh, hold on. Maybe it's not that one. It's definitely the one that was on Vudu is no good, but maybe Letterboxd has the other one too.
Oh, good lord, the Letterboxd poster is terrible.
Yeah, that's the one that was on Vudu too. Top Gun on the ski slopes.
Who said that? Yeah, I like this is the post I'm talking about. I guess it's in the IMDb. I'm looking at the one on the wiki page. I like everything about it. Like it's kind of spare, but there's stuff going on. Like there's images in the background. There's an image in the foreground, and the letters have that like 90s thing where the letters are really spaced out and wide.
Yeah.
I like
it.
That.
Also has the classic blue with orange or teal with orange contrast, which
what a great color combination.
I mean, like 90% of all movie posters have that color combination because it's so appealing to the eyes.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not really sure about it's fine. It's a good poster.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the poster on Letterboxd makes it look like it was a movie that was released
it's so
direct
bad.
Direct to Betamax and no other
it's
format.
So bad. That's your classic floating head poster. Mm-hmm. Top Gun on the ski slopes.
Top Gun on the ski
but
slopes.
It's how I don't really even.
And the titles they couldn't figure out how to blend in the title, so it's just in like its own little text box.
Yep. It's its own thing.
And the tagline is way too long. The tagline's like 7 lines.
Also, Bryce she's there front and center when I would argue that Terry Polo's character, Robin, should be the one that's front and center there. I mean, she's the real love interest.
I guess they couldn't find like a frame in the movie where she's turned enough to the camera.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's all this is taken from.
These are definitely all these are definitely all shots, stills from the movie.
Yeah. It's her in the foreground, like a skiing shot in like the middle ground, and then the two guys in the background, and then a stock photo of a mountain at the bottom, and Aspen Extreme in an opaque text box. Can this become a podcast now about like bad alternate posters? Because
I would love to do a poster podcast. I'd be completely down. There was some snowboarding in this one too, I believe. If I remember correctly, in the other movies there was like no snowboarding at all, but in this one they did show some scenes of people snowboarding, which I thought was, I guess maybe it was a little bit too early for. I mean, snowboarding was around, as we'll get to in a minute, but I thought it was interesting. There was like no representation of snowboarding in these movies.
Maybe there was, but it's only mentioned in one line of dialogue in one scene. But that one line of dialogue tells us they've also been snowboarding for the past 14 years.
That's probably it. That's probably it.
That's just how information is delivered in this movie.
While skiing has always remained a successful winter activity, the 90s saw an explosion in the popularity of extreme sports. And with that, snowboarding began its meteoric rise to glory. Invented in the late 60s, refined and pioneered by Jake Burton, and embraced by a rebellious and brash skate community, snowboarding grew from a niche hobby to a bona fide industry, with over 50 companies producing boards by 1993.
In the summer of 1995, ESPN held its inaugural X Games, then called Extreme Games, and it was a runaway success. The next year, they announced the creation of the Winter X Games, which would predominantly feature snowboarding competitions among other winter sports, with skiing defiantly omitted.
On January 30th, 1997, the first Winter X Games took place in Big Bear Lake, California, to 38,000 spectators. Snowboarding was featured in both X Games events until it moved completely over to the Winter Edition in 2000. The Winter X Games are still taking place today, but along the way, a number of events were discontinued, and I thought we'd take a look at a few of them today. So, Ken, how familiar are you with the Winter X Games, or just the X Games in general?
I mean, I'm new about them just as a concept, but it sort of goes that way for like a lot of major sporting events that aren't like the big household name ones, where I kind of know about them, but I don't really have an in to get into them. But yeah, just reading up about the Winter X Games, there's definitely some interesting stuff in here.
Yeah, so the first Winter X Games, the one that took place in 1997, had a lot of events that they no longer have in the competition. And one of the funniest ones that I found was shovel racing, which that was a one and done thing. They did that in 1997, and they didn't do it anymore after that because they decided that it wasn't safe.
It's definitely not.
You're going down a slope on a modified shovel, and the dude that there was a guy who wrecked and he broke his back. He ended up breaking his back, I believe. And after that, they were like, nope, because they go like 70 miles an hour. They fly down these hills, and I never even heard of it. Like, I didn't know that was an actual X Games event. I thought that was so interesting. It was actually really hard to find information on the first X Games. Like, I was expecting to find like archival footage of the whole thing and like a breakdown of the events and stuff like that. But it really took me a long time to figure out what events took place and which ones were discontinued.
Maybe it's kind of like the XFL like that, where if you try to look for information, the only thing you can find is people talking about how it used to exist.
Yeah. I remember the XFL. I remember watching that on TV. What a weird thing that was.
You're trying to bring it back.
They are. I'm not sure. I don't know if that's gonna.
My very favorite tidbit about the XFL is that it had so little capital just as a media product that they actually modified the rules of the game to shorten the gameplay, because one time the game ran over and it cut into like, it was on NBC, so it cut into like the to the SNL broadcast that night, and Lorne Michaels was so angry that he like complained to NBC, and then the XFL had to change the rules so they'd be done in time for SNL.
That's so amazing. That is so amazing.
You don't cross Lorne Michaels.
No, never. So they had shovel racing. They had ice climbing, which was an event that ended in 1999. I saw some footage of ice climbing. It wasn't from the X Games specifically, but that looks pretty cool. Like, the only thing that I could find as far as like reasoning behind discontinuing that one was lack of support. Like, not, I guess maybe people didn't find that as fun to watch,
like
compared to snowboarding or something.
Or shovel racing. I know we mentioned that, but like, you like the clip of that crash is terrifying.
Yes,
because of the whole thing. It's I mean, it's a miracle that like that wasn't worse.
Yeah, you can.
Just the idea of that is just completely terrifying to me.
Yeah, you can see the clip of that specific race when the guy broke his back on YouTube, and when he wrecks, it just, it looks like it explodes.
It's horrifying.
It's insane. The dude's fine though, by the way. He's fine.
Yeah.
They had ski boarding back then. That went until the year 2000. Ski boarding is kind of it sort of ended up morphing into just I believe freestyle snowboarding, where it was sort of this longer snowboard and they would do like lines on it, sort of like a skateboard. A lot of the snowmobiling events came and went too. I know that there was like a big trick competition that they got rid of, and then I think now maybe it's back again. That was also because it was very dangerous. I think somebody actually got killed doing that. The snowmobile landed on top of him.
Oh,
I'm pretty sure it's back though. And then they also had like snow mountain bike racing, where they would have like mountain bikes with these like giant wheels, and they would race through the snow. I was a pretty big fan of the X Games, more so the summer than the winter. Like I said, the summer X Games had snowboarding in them, so it was sort of like you could get everything in that one. You would have like the skating and biking and snowboarding too, like all the major extreme sports. And man, you're too young, but extreme sports were massive back then. I mean, like they don't even, I think they call them action sports now. They don't even really call them extreme sports anymore. But back in the 90s, they just exploded. Like everything was extreme back then.
Yeah, I feel like some of my early cultural memories are just kind of have the residue, like the after effects of that, because it feels like there's this like reference point to extreme sports, but they just don't use that term. They just didn't use that term because I guess it was kind of already a thing. But yeah, I can definitely say that I can at least sort of understand that there had to be a point just before I was, existing within popular culture and sort of like, living within it, that there had to be like a huge thing for like extreme sports, because it felt like it was still kind of there somehow. And like
yeah. And I think that's really what helped with snowboarding and the X Games too. I mean, I think the X Games helped definitely bring extreme sports into the sort of modern cultural zeitgeist, because it was an organized event, and you had plenty of organized events before, but I don't think there were any really high profile organized events that brought together multiple sports like that, where there were skating, and then back then they had inline skating too, like rollerblading. That was a big thing. That's not in the X Games anymore, I don't think. That kind of came and went, unfortunately, but you still have like your motocrosses and your BMXs and stuff like that in there. And I thought the Winter X Games were always fun to watch. I watched some clips from last year's, and it's still fun to watch. It's still thrilling, especially like the snowmobile stuff, which to me is just crazy to see these giant snowmobiles going off these huge vert ramps and getting such big air from these giant machines, doing like flips on them and stuff. But yeah, I was really into all of that stuff growing up. And it's funny just to learn that snowboarding was invented so long ago, because to me, it seems like it didn't really become popular until the mid 90s. I mean, I could be wrong. I mean, maybe it was really big before that, but it seems like it wasn't until the mid 90s when it just exploded. And I know that like there were issues with at mountains with skiing versus snowboarding, and like the skiers didn't like the snowboarders and vice versa. And then I think it was in the late 80s they opened up a resort that was just for snowboarders.
Yeah, I guess it's like one of those things where it existed, before for a while before it became popular, but I guess the rise was so rapid that it just sort of felt like it just came into being at once.
Yeah, I think so. I think that because like Burton was established in 1977, and I think that they really sort of refined and defined the actual design of the snowboard as we know it. And once they got established and started making this equipment readily available to like to anyone. I think that's when it maybe started to become more than just like a little gimmick. You know, I think a lot of these extreme sports or action sports start off as just like maybe a little bit of a gimmick or like a little hobby, and then gradually turn into something like a full-fledged sport. And now it's in the Olympics, you know? And skiing is actually in the X Games now. It wasn't for many years, but I think skiing is now in the Olympics. I mean, in the X Games.
In the X Games.
It is in the Olympics, but I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Actually, you know what? I don't know. I'm looking at the results. Like, that's how I sort of figured out which events are not that have been discontinued, because I found a site that had like all the winners from the various events over the years. And I sort of just looked to see when they stopped having winners for certain events. And that's how I figured out that they're no longer doing it. And I don't see any skiing winners past 2004. So maybe they don't have skiing in there anymore. I haven't watched them in years, but maybe I'll give them a look this year. It's just since doing all this research on it sort of reignited my interest in these sports.
Kind of fun. It was fun to learn about them. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of interesting, even though it's still around, a lot of interesting 90s ephemera just in the fact that they came about to begin with.
Yeah, and I'm sure that we'll be covering extreme sports on future episodes because it was just such a prominent thing back then. Everything was extreme.
Yeah.
People are talking about Big Sur waterbeds, everyday low prices.
I went to another waterbed store's 50% off sale first.
And what'd you find?
I found that Big Sur's everyday prices are lower.
Than the 50% off sales?
Yes. Plus I saved on top of that.
Save even more during Big Sur's 6% sale. Our guaranteed lowest prices plus an additional 6% savings equals your best price on a waterbed. Big Sur Waterbeds. For the Quad City's largest selection, it's worth the drive to 1010 East Kimberly in Davenport.
I think people are saying is the most non-falsifiable, like, meaningless marketing phrase there is. People are talking about, like, sure, I guess they are. Like, if they've mentioned it once, then you're technically correct.
How would they even know? How would they even know?
Like, I guess hypothetically, at some point, someone maybe had mentioned a Big Sur waterbed, which makes it correct.
Are waterbeds still a thing?
I hope not. That seems like a terrible idea.
Is that something that's like still around? I mean, like, did you ever know anybody that had a waterbed?
No, but I knew of them. I've known of them. Like, I'd heard about them, all the time, but usually very pejoratively. So I don't think they're really a thing anymore. I'm sure they exist. But
I had some friends who had parents that had water beds, and I can say that I have been on a water bed, and I never really understood them.
Yeah, it just seems like a not good idea. Just nothing about it seems like it makes sense.
No, it doesn't seem like it'd be good for your neck or your back or anything. It's just it's a bad idea all around.
Yeah, it feels like it must be, like, incredibly, I don't know. I can't really picture that in my head. Like, I just heard people mention them, and I thought, that can't be a real thing.
Oh, it's a real thing.
Yeah, but I know it is. I just can't, like, this seems like it would be so many problems. Like, that doesn't seem comfortable at all.
No, I mean, you're constantly moving. Like, you lay down on it, and you're just constantly moving.
I feel like I would have nightmares about drowning every night on one of those things.
Oh, man. Waterbeds. Love it. Our final film this month is a bit of a departure from the goofy, fun-loving snow adventures we previously looked at, based on the true story of the 1972 plane crash in which the Uruguayan rugby team was stranded in the Andes. This is Alive.
We're starving and we're trapped.
On Friday, January 15th, Touchstone and Paramount Pictures present a motion picture that will astonish you. It will frighten you. It will shock you.
We've got to eat.
He won.
But nothing will prepare you for what 16 survivors did to stay alive.
From their death, we live.
Alive. Based on a true story. Rated R. Starts Friday, January 15th at a theater near you.
Alive is directed by Frank Marshall and tells the harrowing true story of what the Uruguayan rugby team had to go through to survive the harsh snow-drenched environment of the Andes. I do love that this is part of our discussion this month. It really does feel like a natural progression, doesn't it?
That's why I was like, I decided to end the show with Alive.
No, we should have put it in between Ski School and Ski Patrol.
just bring the tone down a little bit.
Yeah. This movie's fine. It feels like a lot of the aspects of what makes this actual real story so interesting are kind of not really played with, like not really utilized in a way, because it doesn't really feel like a survival story. Maybe because it's just so fixated on like trying to develop these characters in relatively inorganic ways, but I think it's definitely the best movie out of anything we've talked about this month. It's okay, but it's just not quite living up to the potential of this obviously very, very fascinating story.
Yeah, so I agree. I saw this movie before, way back in the day, and I do agree with you. It is the best of the bunch, certainly. And I do also agree with you that they didn't really capitalize on the whole survival aspect. Now, I don't know how much of that has to do with what these people actually did in real life. A lot of what they do is just they just sit around. Like they just sit around and you know, they're not very resourceful. Like, you know, in a lot of these movies, some sort of disaster happens and then you have either the whole group or, you know, a few people like, okay, let's gather up the supplies. Let's do this. You do that. You do that. You gather up as many coats as we can. And they didn't really do that. They just kind of hung out inside the plane, like just sitting there like smoking. And
like, it's a lot of exposition, which is doesn't really work for this.
Yeah. I think the first and glaring thing to note is the blatant whitewashing that occurs in this movie. You have this is the Uruguayan rugby team, and you have Ethan Hawke as one of the leaders of the team as Nando.
Yes.
Not sure that works. And Josh Hamilton, who's maybe the whitest looking white guy ever, as Roberto. Not so, you know, that's just how they made movies back then.
Yes, I mean, I guess they could say that perhaps Uruguay is just that many Uruguayans are primarily European descent, but these are some of the whitest actors. I mean, honestly.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
So
like it is very white. This that was the first thing that kind of threw me off a little bit.
It's a little jarring. It's a little bit jarring. And I think that it's a little tonally awkward too, because they inject a lot of comedy in this, or at least they attempt to inject a lot of humor. And at times it's like, I don't know if this is working. I mean, sometimes it does provide a nice bit of levity to the horrible situation that they're in, but at other times, like especially like right after the plane crash, they're like joking and stuff, and like the joke when the guy has the piece of the plane like stuck in his stomach, like that was played for laughs, and it just felt weird. A lot of the stuff in this feels
it goes so much in trying to be funny, like right after a really effectively terrifying crash scene. Like it's probably one of like the more disturbing plane crashes in a movie, I think. Like it's really well done.
Yeah, it's definitely up there. I think Final Destination I think still has a pretty solid plane crash scene too, but this is definitely up there. It's so it's a little tonally off a bit, but a lot of the stuff, a lot of the humor, it did land. Like the fact that they found like thousands of cigarettes, so for the rest of the movie they're all just chain smoking nonstop, which I thought that was kind of funny. And the other big thing about this movie, the thing that everybody knows this movie for, is the fact that they had to eat people.
Yes.
I mean, that's the hook. You know, you heard it in the trailer, you hear it in the synopsis, and they frequently allude to it before it actually happens in the movie. And it's just such a centerpiece of this movie. And I feel like that maybe was a little bit of a mistake to have it be the centerpiece. Like maybe it would have been best to surprise people, you know, with the idea that they had to do such a horrible thing.
Yeah, but I think it's the kind of thing that people were kind of wanting to go into this with.
Yeah.
Because it's such a lurid aspect of it, and anybody who knew about the actual event would know that happened. But playing it up like it's some big, almost like it's something that you sort of pay off towards, just seems like a really weird, not great choice.
Yeah, I guess that was my main nitpick with it, was the fact that they kept foreshadowing it, and Ethan Hawke at one point even jokes about it, and then that's sort of what puts the idea in their heads, and then it just all the small things that they inject that allude to the idea that they're going to have to do this. Like, for instance, the rationing, when they think that for some reason, you know, they see a plane and they think, oh, that plane saw us, they're going to come pick us up tomorrow. And then they consume all of the food that they have rationed that day. Like, why would you ever think that? Like, they just assumed that they were going to get picked up the next day. Like, there's nothing to make you think that.
It doesn't really cover the actual progression of events in a very, very understandable way. Like, if you do look up the actual timeline of events of like the survivors and on the Mount and the Andes actually over the 72 days, like the movie follows it pretty accurately. Like every major thing that happened in real life happens in the movie in about that order, but that feels like it's almost doing that to the point where it forgoes actually trying to develop this story in an organic way.
Yeah, I think that they also, and maybe there was no better way to handle this, but there's a lot of people that die in this, and there will be frequently there will be characters that we spend a lot of time with who just die, and they'll just be like, oh, so and so is dead. And like the guy who was their captain, he dies, and like I thought that was him. Like when they show him after the avalanche, I was like, I think that's him, but I wasn't quite sure, just because his mouth was open and he was covered in snow and everything. And then they were just like, oh, and then that's it. Now, again, I don't know if there was a better way of them handling that, like spending a little more time with the idea that one of the main guys that we were with the whole time is now dead. But I don't know. It was something that seemed a little off to me, but
yeah, it was funny you mentioned that, because when you were saying that, I was looking at the actual wiki article for the flight, and you make the perfect point that it just feels like they're just going through and just, new people are dead. And that's exactly how it reads, just on the Wikipedia article, there's a section that traces the timeline like day by day and then lists like the casualties on each day. And that's about the passion with which the movie does it. Like, it feels the same as just a list in an article.
Yeah, you're just like oh,
day 34, this person died. Day 37, this person died.
Yeah, and several of it just feels weird, because some of the people that die, we didn't really spend that much time with at all. And then there's some people, when they die, they focus on it more, like Elena Douglas's character, Liliana. When she dies, they do spend more time with that. But then it's like, oh, when the captain of the team dies, we just, oh, yep, he's dead. And I wasn't even sure that was him that died. I was like, oh, I guess that was him. Also, what happened? Did I miss what happened to the engineer guy? Because I don't remember. Did he survive? Because I don't remember seeing. Because this guy was like a nut, and I don't remember seeing him later on. So I don't know if he.
I mean,
don't know if he died or what happened to him.
I guess he did. Yeah, it doesn't really. Like you said, it's hard to envision how the movie could have done this ideally, because you are dealing with a lot of characters. But yes, it's not too good at keeping track of them all. And that does kind of weigh on it after a while, because it spends so much of its time just having a small handful of characters continually just sort of spout exposition at each other.
Yeah. I did think that the avalanche scene was really harrowing too. That whole scene when the avalanche comes and buries them all, that was crazy. And I thought I enjoyed the movie for the most part. I'm just sort of highlighting the criticisms I had with it, but I did enjoy it for the most part. I thought it was pretty well acted from everyone. Some characters were more annoying than others, but given the circumstances, I can understand why they may be acting like that in such a horrific environment that they're in.
Yeah, I would not presume to know how I would what being in that situation does to just one on an emotional level.
Yeah, the fact that they had to. They didn't even cook the people when they ate them. They ate them raw. They just cut pieces off and ate them. I would think that they would make a fire because they all had lighters, right? I mean, I would at least hold the meat over my lighter to give it just char it a little bit, cook it up a little bit. And the one dude, I think he died. It seemed like they were alluding to the fact that he died from eating the people, but I'm not sure if it was just exposure or if it had something to do with that. I don't know. I don't even remember his name, but like they came back and all of a sudden he was like really sick.
Yeah, I kind of remember that. Like, yeah, but
it was towards the end.
Yeah, it's hard to pull out individual aspects of this movie because it seems to be so built around major points that it's trying to like hit to accurately trace the chronology of the event, so that anything that happens in between just kind of feels like it's sort of suspended in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, I also didn't like the Malkovich stuff because I didn't understand why it was there.
Yeah, I didn't either, but his monologues at the beginning and the end were apparently written by the real Carlitos Paez.
I mean, I guess that's
interesting.
Cool. But it felt weird and doesn't really
feel like it's worked in well enough.
Yeah, I mean, maybe even just have that character just narrating that bit at the beginning rather than having a sit down with John Malkovich. Did they even say who that character was? Did they even identify Malkovich's character?
They sort of do, but it's, if I remember correctly, it's not terribly direct, but you kind of piece it together.
It's an incredible story. The fact that they were stranded out there for so long was just amazing. That they made it through.
Even like the cursory reading that I did about this, just after watching the movie, it reveals just how fascinating and harrowing a story this is, just beyond what most people know about it. If they know about it, it's just that they had to end up eating people. But it's just so much more like interesting and almost haunting than that, and which makes it a shame because it even the movie about it feels like it's just so focused on that one thing that people know it for, and it kind of undersells just the extent of this.
Like the one thing that everybody knows, it's not that the fact that these people were stranded in the Andes for 72 days. 72 days. Like, it's not that. It's the fact that they ate people. Like, that's the thing. They were eating people.
Mm-hmm.
And
like almost to the point where, like, you're right, it foreshadows it. The movie comes dangerously close to treating it like a joke.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's a little odd. I remember when the movie came out, and it was like, that was what everybody was talking about. I remember there was even a joke on The Simpsons about it. That was just what this movie was known for. Oh, it's that movie about the people that have to eat other people. Like, and I didn't actually see it until years later, but I think I caught it on TV actually. I also just, a lot of the decisions that they make were really questionable. And I'm sure that that's probably what happened in real life, but I found myself being like, what are you guys doing? Like, find fuel, start a fire. They didn't actually make a fire, at least in the movie, until like they were like there for 60 days or something. They were in there forever. And then all of a sudden they decided to make a fire.
I thought an interesting IMDb trivia item that almost plays into that, almost the weird prioritizing this movie does. It's just this random trivia item near the bottom. Ethan Hawke refused to grow a beard for the film, so he maintained his goatee at the same length throughout the entire movie, which feels telling in a way about like these really important like aspects depicting the chronology of it that are just overlooked.
Yeah.
I think it's like in Roger Ebert's review also points it out. Like 72 days after being stranded at the top of a mountain, they basically look the same.
I often thought about like their energy level and stuff too, because often like it's especially like Ethan Hawke's character, he never seemed like he was in a bad way. Like except at the beginning, you know, when he got knocked out and stuff. But for the rest of the movie, he was like fit as a fiddle. He's running around climbing mountains, you know, doing all this stuff. He didn't even seem like it was affecting him one bit. Pretty decent time though.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely worth a watch just to, you know, learn about this thing that happened in, you know, relative recent history.
All right. I believe that's going to do it for this month. Thank you so much for listening. If you have a moment, please consider reviewing us on iTunes. We would really appreciate that. You can follow us on Twitter at 90spod and be sure to drop us a DM with your favorite 90s memories. For Ken Bakley, my name is Adam Patterson, and this has been Saved by the 90s.
Bye, everyone.